on episode 250 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. I go solo and I talk to you about a real life story about the mess you get when your authorities and responsibilities don't align. That's right, folks. It's all about real life today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy here, and thanks for tuning in to the show for episode 250. Wow, can't believe it. You know, when I was coming up on episode 250, I thought to myself, what am I going to do to commemorate this? What am I going to do special for 250? Because, you know, the average podcast lasts like 13 episodes or something. And 250 is definitely a huge milestone. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, why do anything special at all? Just keep doing what I've been doing day in, day out with the show. I'm bringing you quality content on leadership today. So that's what I'm doing today. And in particular, we have a real life story. That's right. So I'm going to talk to you about responsibilities and authorities, and as well as accountabilities. And I'm going to overlay this real life story that is happening to a listener, a member of our free Facebook group, Leadership Skills for Managers Who Want to Be Leaders, Not Bosses, as well as a former Leader Growth Mastermind member, Leticia, her story. And it's one that I've been personally following with great interest for some time now. Before I tell you her story, though, let's dive into what these responsibilities, authorities, and accountabilities actually are. Because they're linked, but they're not exactly the same. So, responsibilities are, right? We're used to responsibilities. We generally know what responsibilities are, right? Those are the things you are responsible to achieve. Those are the tasks that you are responsible to have completed day in, day out, whatever. We know those really good. So I think I can jump past responsibilities. Authorities. Those are the things that you can do that you're able to do. Some people, you know, it could be money. You may be entitled, or not entitled, but authorized to spend so much of your budget at a certain time. You're authorized to let your people go on holidays. Maybe you're authorized to hire, fire, reprimand, discipline, hold accountable, whatever. These are all the different things you're authorized to do. You hold that authority. You can decide to do it or not. I think that one is self-explanatory. The accountabilities aspect is one that a lot of people don't quite get. A lot of people mix them up with responsibilities, but they're not exactly the same. So, let me put it in context for you. You have a responsibility to make sure your tasks are done, and so on and so forth. But as a leader of a team, you're accountable for your team members. Therefore, if they don't do their responsibilities, you're to account for that. See the difference? Right? It's not your responsibility to do their tasks. However, you are accountable for their performance. Make sense? Okay. And this is where the core of Leticia's problem comes from, in that her responsibilities, authorities, and accountabilities weren't aligned. So let's talk about this situation. So Leticia, she was in charge of a team. She had a team, and she was in charge of it. She was a manager, I believe, about 6 or 8 people, and she was responsible for them. Day in, day out, she had a great team, except for 2 members. See, these 2 members thought they were above the rest. They thought that Leticia's authorities didn't matter. So they would regularly question her judgment, question her requirements, question her in front of others. They would simply ignore her guidance, her direction. Basically, act as if Leticia was not their supervisor, but rather just another person. So you can see how frustrating it must be for her. You are responsible for the performance of the team, and you're accountable. Her supervisor was noting the problem with the team, not the problem with the 2 individuals, but rather the problem with the team weren't necessarily doing what they were supposed to do all the time. And whenever Leticia brought it up to her supervisor, her supervisor didn't believe that the 2 people were, in fact, as bad as what Leticia said they were. 2, didn't believe that the problems were actually problems, which led to the quote-unquote T problems. And finally, 3, didn't enable Leticia to handle the problem herself. You see, Leticia's supervisor held the authorities for discipline, consequences, accountability for the team. So here comes the misalignment. Leticia, on one hand, is responsible for her team, is to account for the team's performance, yet holds no authority to deal with the issue. And since she held no authority to deal with the issue, these 2 team members simply did whatever they could. Did whatever what they wanted. It didn't matter, because the moral of the story is that Leticia held no authority to be able to do anything about it. And seeing that these 2 members obviously knew that Leticia's supervisor was in their back pocket, that supervisor sided with them every time Leticia brought an issue forward. Things such as claiming false overtime, simply working on overtime while just simply browsing on their phone, which she believed was a misconduct issue, which I would say, yes, it was. The moral of the story is that Leticia, despite being accountable for her team as the team lead, held no authority to deal with the problems that it had. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get into this mess. If you, as a leader, are accountable and responsible for things within your team, you have to have the authority to deal with it as required. Okay? Doesn't mean, in this case, in Leticia's case, that she needed to hold the authority to fire. But she had the need to have the authority to, hold her team members to account, to discipline, to reprimand, to simply get them to understand that decisions have consequences and that they can't simply do whatever it is They do. Now, hit the pause button for a second. I know. You're probably thinking, Scott. She could have had a talk with them. She could have made them understand. And she could have done this, that, and the other thing before you get to the point of needing to reprimand, hold people account, so on and so forth. 100% agree. What I personally tell you is she had been there a long time before. She had tried all the softer approaches to dealing with this problem. But unfortunately, as you can imagine, it went nowhere. So, this is why I'm saying Leticia was in a rock and hard place in that she was responsible and accountable for the actions of her team members, yet held no authority to deal with it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the perfect storm for this kind of mess. So, if you're a subordinate, such as Leticia, and you're in this problem space, you are, trying to deal with something. And maybe it's not necessarily just team members who are not being, fully held accountable. Maybe it is budgetary concerns where you're responsible for managing the budget, yet you have no authority over the budget. It could be equipment. It could be other personnel. It could be so much more. The thing is that this framework works for every situation in that if you're to be held accountable for something, you have to hold the authority to be able to administer it, react to it, apply it, deal with it, whatever. Do you have to have the ultimate authority? Not necessarily, but you have to have a level of authority which is commensurate to the level of what your responsibility is. So if expectation from your supervisor is X, the level of authority that you hold has to match X for the level of accountability that corresponds. You see, these three things are succinct. They mesh together. They come together. When you don't have one which is synced with the others, you have it out of alignment, which causes these problems. So if you're that subordinate and you see that you don't have the authorities in line with your responsibilities and your accountabilities, then you need to bring this up to your supervisor and basically explain the situation to them, that either they grant you the authorities to do whatever it is you need to do, or they throttle back the responsibilities and accountabilities so that you are actually empowered properly to deal with it, whatever it is you need to deal with. Now, if you're a supervisor and you have a subordinate coming to you, like, I can't deal with this situation. So imagine you're Leticia's supervisor and she's constantly coming to you complaining about these two individuals and that she has no authority in her to deal with them. You need to stop for a second and go, holy cow, one of my team leads here is having a problem and I'm the bottleneck. I'm the person holding the hammer. I'm the person who's deciding everything. Something's wrong. You have to empower your people to deal with their problems firsthand. If you empower a member to be a team lead, you have to actually give them all the team lead's powers, which may include, in Leticia's situation, the power to reprimand, power to discipline. Doesn't mean you're out of the picture. You always have a vote, but you need to back up your team lead and you need to empower them to be able to do their job. If they're not doing their job, then you're doing their job. And I question you to say who is actually doing your job. So in this case, in Leticia's scenario, maybe her supervisor didn't give her the power to fire. Maybe that held with her. But her supervisor could have easily given her the ability to discipline. And then if you wanted to fire these individuals, you have to build the case. Now, as well in this scenario, there was obviously a situation where her supervisor didn't have Leticia's back, right? Didn't support her. You need to support your team leads. When you don't, especially in situations like this, where she's telling these individuals she's going to bring these actions up to her supervisor for action, and then nothing comes out of it, what you're doing is you're deflating the authority, whatever authority left in her with these people, and then you're validating the actions that they are doing. No. Recipe for disaster. And this is where we're at. So what's going to happen moving forward? That's a great question. I'm not a crystal ball, but I'll tell you what Leticia said I could say. And that she is no longer responsible, nor has any accountability for her team members' actions. She's actually not a team lead anymore. She's just going to focus on her part of the team and what she was doing and not actually be responsible for the other team members. She no longer has subordinates. Now, is this going to be a great, angels coming out, singing hallelujah, and the team is suddenly going to gel? Probably not. In reality is, I suspect that it will actually have the inverse. I think it's actually going to drive a larger wedge amongst the team members, in that now, especially with these two who were completely insubordinate, who didn't listen, will even push the envelope harder and farther, in that now they will see Leticia even less. She was once, quote unquote, a team lead that they didn't follow. Now to them, she's simply a peer. Now the gloves can really come off, and that's my fear. So, I'm willing to bet that Leticia will be on the job hunt soon, and I wish her best of luck. And for her supervisor out there who's listening, congratulations, you enabled a mess. And you could have simply avoided the mess if you had listened to her in the first place and aligned her responsibilities, her accountabilities, and authorities properly to deal with this situation. And that's it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. So remember, as always, lead, don't boss. Take care now.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.